In the next few days, those of us who are resident in Ontario and of voting age will be able to go to the polls and make a choice, or perhaps a number of choices. We will be invited to choose who will be our local representative in the legislature. We'll be invited to choose which party we hope will form the next government in our province, and by extension, which party leader might become the next premier of our province. We will be invited to make choices. Life is full of choices. Our text from the Gospel of Mark, which Dick read so eloquently just a few moments ago, was a text that invites us to think about choices. For those of you who have been coming to church for many Sundays over many years and even many decades, these stories of the conflict between Jesus and the religious leaders of his day seem to be old hat. Jesus always seems to be running into trouble with a group called the Pharisees, or a group called the Sadducees, or the high priests, or some form of a religious leadership in his day. In today's episode, the conflict took shape around the nature of the Sabbath, the seventh day of the week, the day of rest. The day which symbolized and remembered for the Jewish people that God, in fact, rested, having finished the work of creation, and that through their law, they too were to rest, having finished their week's work. Jesus and his disciples were engaged in some activities which likely seem to our eyes and ears to be helpful, or at least quite innocuous on the Sabbath. And yet, as we heard, these activities drew the wrath of the Pharisees, and they engaged in a debate, we might even say an argument, a significant conflict over what Jesus and his disciples were doing. Was it in keeping with what God wanted? What's going on in this particular debate? In decades gone by, it was common to think that the debate between Jesus and the religious leaders of his day centered on the question of freedom. The religious leaders liked rules and order and law and to control the behavior of other people. Jesus, in contrast, stood for freedom. And this contrast was the source of debate and conflict. In my view, this is only part of what's going on in an episode like this one. To really understand it more fully, I think we need to ask ourselves, what was at stake for the Pharisees and folks like them in religious leadership in the first century? I think that for these folks, the law stood for something more than simply rules and order and control. See, the Sabbath and the laws of diet and all the other rules which made up the law of Moses were not so much about structure and control and limits on freedom, but of the very identity of Israel as the people of God. What made the law so important to the religious leaders of the day, it was this particular and unique combination of laws which set the nation of Israel apart, and which, because it had set them apart, identified them as a people, as a nation distinct from all the other nations of the earth. And it was because they had this law that they were identified as God's people, and that for them, they were God's people. And so when this person, Jesus, comes along and seems at times to flout this law, and even to encourage others to do the same, even if in ways that seem minor and unimportant to us, the interpretation of the Pharisees was that Jesus was undermining this entire system. While it might seem very nice to heal someone's withered hand on the Sabbath, that is not worth the price of undermining the importance of the Sabbath, which was not negotiable. They thought Jesus was setting them on a slippery slope to the dissolution of the law, and therefore their dissolution as the clearly identified people of God. And this was so important to them, understandably, that they were even willing to think of killing this person for something which seems minor, like plucking a little bit of grain while walking through a field, or even something which seems good, such as healing someone who was sick. At other times, Jesus' own actions seem confusing. He was a Jew, and in fact, a law-observant Jew. And folks have been confused about why he, as a law-observant Jew, would at times be so dismissive and cavalier of the law. Well, in our text from Mark today, Jesus gives the reason. He is the Lord. He is the Lord of the Sabbath. He is Lord of the law. He is in flesh, in person, in human form, the God who gave that law in the first place. And Jesus drew on the prophetic tradition, which said that God had from the very beginning called forth and set apart the people of Israel and given them this law as an identity marker so that they might be distinct from all the nations, so that through their distinction and through their unique identity, God himself, the Creator, might become known to all the nations. So the purpose of the law, according to the prophetic tradition, was not to create a distinct people as an end in itself, but to create a distinct people so that all peoples of the world would come to know God their Maker, to know God their Savior, to know the creating God who loves them and who wants to be with them and in their midst. And so Jesus, by saying he is the Lord of the Sabbath and the Lord of the law, identified himself as the Messiah of Israel, the chosen one of God, in whom the fulfillment of the law's purpose had come. And so this text invites us to make a choice. Who or what is our master? What is our highest end? Who or what is the vision of our dreams? To what goal or purpose is our life progressing? In what service is our life's work? Is it the law? Is it some other source of our identity? Is it money or power or sex? Or is it something else. We are invited to make a choice which is much more significant than any ballot we will cast in an election. We are invited to make a choice of who is our master. To what end will we live? Who will lead us in ways that no politician ever could? We are called by this text and the story of the Bible from beginning and end to make Jesus our master. How do we do that? Well, in short, we are invited to live our lives in thought and word and deed, in faithfulness and obedience to Him. One small way we can do it is by coming together to the Lord's table. By doing so, we, as I told the children, proclaim and remember that He is Lord, that He has died, that He is risen, and that He will come again. Thanks and praise be to God. Amen. Our next hymn is to be found on your green-colored insert, the half sheet. God sees the little sparrow fall.